Hi guys, Scott here with the Hydroponic Gardener again. This is episode 2 of our series. Bear with me on the audio. We've got some audio equipment coming that'll make things a little better. If I sound a little quiet, I'm trying to talk a little louder right now to help out. Today I wanted to cover the Kratky method of hydroponics as far as what you can use to grow plants without any kind of air pump or water pump. Ultimately, to start out with hydroponics, the last video we talked about fertilizer. We didn't really touch bases on hydroponics in general. It's a soilless plant cultivation. There's records that date back to thousands of years ago during the Hanging Gardens of Babylon where they used this kind of method. And the biggest advantages of it is water conservation. Clearly, when you water in a soil, you are kind of second guessing how much water you're giving the plant. If you give it too much, you can suffocate it and not give it enough oxygen. You can also not water it enough, and then the roots dry out and the plant dies. And when you do water in soil, a lot of it's lost to evaporation because of the heat. So the advantage with hydroponics, the biggest advantage I think, is water conservation and the fact that you don't lose a lot of water to evaporation. It's recirculated in a lot of systems and things like that. So on to the Kratky system. Ultimately, it's a passive system, is what they refer to it as, non-circulating type of system where you can grow plants that are suspended above a reservoir in a nutrient-rich solution. So I wanted to show you a little bit about how you can make one. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. You can use a bucket, you can use a container. We've even used things like a quart-sized mason jar. Paint it with black chalk paint so you don't let the light in. Doesn't affect it as far as the algae is concerned, and you can write on it with chalk whatever you want as far as what you're growing. This is some arugula, but I'll explain to you how these systems work. Ultimately, a bucket, any kind of reservoir that you have, it can hold your solution, and you're going to need a lid to suspend the plant in the air. I used one that I've already got cut, but I'm going to walk you through how you would do that. You can either use a hole saw, which is the most convenient, obviously, if you have a hole saw, and you'll just end up punching holes through the lid and however many you need. This lid is actually used for seed starter. When I get my seeds transplanted right after they've come up out of the dirt or the cocoa coir I use, I'll stick them in here, and then as they get bigger, I'll transplant them to a larger system depending on what they're going to go in. But this is usually what I'll use to get a multiple amount of plants started in the season before the frost date hits, and that way I can get them done in the basement and before I transplant them outside. So once you punch holes in your lid, you'll need some kind of a container to hold the plant in. They do sell net cups online in front of the bucket so you can see them a little better. 3-inch, 2-inch are kind of the common size. They also have bucket lids that will actually fit on a 5-gallon bucket, and they've usually got about 6-inch openings depending on if you're growing a bigger plant with a bigger root base and you kind of want some more room for it. But really, guys, you don't need to order a whole lot of fancy stuff. I mean, if you don't want to pay the money for these, I've seen people use red Solo cups. You just stack 4 or 5 of them together to strengthen the sidewall's integrity, and then you can just drill holes through them to make your own net cups ultimately, and those have worked. I've grown tomatoes out of Solo cups before, and they've done just fine. They just need something to suspend them in the system. And when they're in the system, whatever container you're holding the plant in, you put the plant in, you need to have something to kind of support it because they don't have the support they have in the ground. That's one disadvantage to that. But they have stuff that's called hydrogen. It's like little clay pebbles. That stuff works really well. The reason I prefer this is because it's reusable, so you don't have to throw it away. A lot of people will use things like perlite and things like that as well. And in Dutch bucket systems, which we'll get into in another episode, but you'll see people fill an entire bucket full of perlite, when in reality that can cost a lot of money, where you can just use a 3-inch net cup suspended with the perlite or hydrogen in it and save all that medium, so you don't have to waste all of it on the plant. So the net cups to suspend the plant on the lid, and then your reservoir. I had a mark around here to show you how these work. So a Kratky system was invented, not really invented, but suggested by Bernard Kratky of the University of Hawaii back in like 2009, I think it was, and he had suggested cultivating plants by suspending them above the water. And so that's kind of where his last name obviously became the method used. But ultimately, when you would put a plant in a reservoir, you would have the net cup or the container of some sort hanging at the top. And you know, with the lighting, you're not gonna be able to see that too well. But the net cup will be right there, and then the water solution would be filled right to the bottom line of the net cup. So when you'd go to put your net cup in your lid, as you filled the reservoir, you'd stick that in and just make sure that the water is actually just breaking the surface of that, so it's at the bottom of that net cup, because that's where your roots are gonna just barely touch that surface. As that gets put in there and that water's there, when the plant starts to absorb that nutrient solution, it's gonna drink down the water as it takes in the nutrients and grows. What that does is it creates a oxygen zone or an air zone where the roots in this area will form oxygen roots. Basically, that's where they get their air from, because the plant does need three different things. I mean, it needs water, oxygen, and light, or nutrients and light, I guess, so to grow. So that's ultimately what it'll do, is as it sucks down the nutrient solution, it creates its own air zone. So it's getting its oxygen here, it's getting its nutrients from the reservoir where the water still is, and its water, and light obviously from the surface. And I use this as an example. This is one of the seed starters I was talking about, similar to this lid. I've got plants in this one. You can see them there. And see if I can hold this a little closer to you. What we got? You can see the roots already growing on this, popping out like that. And these can be transplanted to different system. It doesn't have to be dedicated to Kratky if you start it this way. So this is, a lot of times, this is what I'll do, like I say, with my seed starts. And then as they get a little bit bigger, then I'll move them into NFT systems or Dutch buckets, depending on what I'm growing. The nice thing about this system is, like I say, it takes no power, no water pump, no air pump is needed, and you can grow multiple types of plants in here. Anything from small things like vegetables and or herbs to vegetables like tomato plants. I mean, a 5-gallon bucket's really not bad for that. You just, with larger plants like that, you actually can't just leave it like you can with a lot of smaller plants like lettuce and certain herbs and things like that. Tomatoes and stuff, those plants get really large, and when they do, you need to refill the container as you kind of monitor the water level. You don't want to refill it all the way up to the top of the net cup, because you're going to suffocate it. You know, it needs to have some form of an air zone for the oxygen to get to the roots. So after it starts to suck the water down, when it starts to get low, you want to refill it maybe about halfway, so you still have that air zone there for the roots to get oxygen. So that's the Kratky system, very basic. There's not a lot to it. One of the key things with all the systems that you need to be concerned of and just make sure that you're aware of is light. You don't want light getting into your containers. If you do allow that, then you're going to have algae issues, and then once the algae develops, it's going to kind of compete with the roots to take the nutrients and the oxygen from the water, and that's not something you want. Obviously, you want that to go to the plant. So keep that in mind when you're using any type of container that you find. If it's something bright or thin plastic that light can penetrate through, you can always wrap it. Just use anything you got, paper, a trash bag, black trash bag over it. You can just tape it to kind of cover it. Or if you want it to look nice, I go to the extreme with some of my stuff. I'll put 2x4 frames around them so they look like planter boxes, things like that. And that helps with insulation as well, because temperatures are an issue as well. You want to keep the temperatures up around 65 to 70 degrees. You don't want them to get too high, or the nutrients won't be absorbed by the roots. So that's just briefly what Kratky system is. I'll go into more detail on deep water culture in the next episode. And again, I was trying to keep these short so that for future reference, people can dissect the videos if they're looking for a particular method rather than go searching in an individual video. So if you have any questions, hit me up. You can subscribe on the side there if you want to get notifications on future videos. And again, if you have any questions, let us know. Thanks. Have a great day. Bye. Sorry guys, one last thing. I wanted to show you a supersized version of the Kratky system I've got going right now. This is like a bigger example of what we were talking about with the bucket. This is a 55-gallon drum, and this was the bucket lid I was referring to that would actually fit right on top of a 5-gallon bucket. But I cut a hole out, laid that in there, and same concept. The roots are just touching the surface. The water is filled up, you know, just below the area where that net cup is, so that it's just touching the bottom of that surface. That way the roots are already making contact with the water, and it will eventually grow in, and that will be attached to a trellis, and it will take off. So that's the nice thing about these. There's been experiments done where people have grown an entire plant without having to do anything with the water. On the smaller scale, you could do that with lettuce and herbs easily with like a 5-gallon bucket or even smaller containers. And with this is the winter squash, so this is gonna be a bigger plant. But 55-gallon drum, you can grow things like that, and cucumbers, things like that in it. And again, we'll go over the NFT system and Dutch buckets and things like that on another video. Thanks again, guys, and have a great day. Bye.